at this. We've got fans in the audience. Well, it gives me great pleasure to announce the stage. He's live and in person. Mr. Richard Rushfield. Richard, come on up. He's the editor-in-chief, creative visionary, driving the content. And also we have one of his chief writers and contributors. He's joining us from New York. He's the creator and the writer for the WAKEUP entertainment industry newsletter, but he's also part of the Ankler Media team. Please give a warm welcome to Sean McNulty. Sean, let's get him up on screen. Guy. There's us. Hang on one second. Ah, there you are. Let's make sure you can hear us.
Very big mic.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
Oh, yeah, click that on.
Very big mic there.
Yeah, you got a big microphone in front of you there, buddy.
do I sound good? That's the most important part.
That's right. Psst, it's not radio.
Exactly. Come on. I want a big
By the way, I love the hairdo. I love the hairdo. Come on. You're winning points there.
Barber. Yep.
All right, gentlemen. You launched in January of this year. Is that correct? January 2020.
We relaunched.
Relaunched.
I've been doing it sort of as a one-man show for about 4 years, and then I was joined by new editor Janice Min, who was formerly editor of Hollywood Reporter. Indeed. And we've started bringing out new writers, including most especially Sean McNulty here, who does our morning wake-up newsletter, and it was a great addition to the team.
Awesome. And talk about Ankler just a little bit in terms of inspiration, motivation. You've been a writer in town for a while?
Yeah, I've been a journalist and covering the industry for a long, long time, decades now. And you know, I read the trades, and I was just sort of intrigued by this new newsletter technology that was coming around, and the idea that the trades were forced to do something. Create these very broad publications that were speaking to billions of people. And it was very hard for them to do something really meaningful and focused to the people in the industry. And that idea of using newsletter to do something that's really special for people that work there, and then you could be more sort of fearless and sardonic and make waves and make trouble. And that's what the Ankler's been about.
And that's why we love it. So thank you.
you.
And Sean, how'd you end up on the Ankler team, and talk a little bit about your journey and how you got here?
Yeah, I'm coming at it from a different perspective. I was an executive for HBO for most of my career, going from working on marketing content, video content, marketing strategy, going back from HBO On Demand to HBO Go to HBO Now to the launch of HBO Max was a little bit in the future. So kind of the spectrum from when HBO was the king of Sunday night, which I guess it still is on a linear basis, to through its digital transformation. And I started the Wake Up newsletter. You know, I've been a proud, as I say, lifelong media nerd. I've read the trade since I was in college, quite frankly. And, I just had this, concept that the morning newsletter could use a little help. And it was just like a lot of things weren't serving the reader. They were serving the outlet or the business model. But I knew I was taking from an executive perspective. And I'm like, this isn't helpful to the people, or I felt that you're really trying to reach here. And a lot of times think that you're not spoken to in a certain way. Let me just break this down for you. That, people are afraid to kind of like, well, here's what it says. I'm like, well, no, here's what this really means. And knowing what those conversations are inside the executive, the conference rooms and the hallways of an HBO or of a, Charter Communications where I worked as well, so it was kind of an idea to like, well, let me make something that for people that I worked with for my whole career, and let me see if this kind of is a thing. And it really just started organically. And then Janice Min, our CEO of the Ankler there, got on her radar, and she had just joined Richard for a few months in, and they reached out. I think Richard, they've been talking about kind of that very concept of like, we should be in a daily space, and they, love what I was doing. And then, I love the Ankler. So that was how we came together.
Great, another voice in the mix as well. So today we've been talking about data. This is a data-driven content. How does data open up new business opportunities? Data and technology within M&E. We started with Peacock. Amazon Studios talked about DEI in the middle of the day, and we've had a lot of great subject matter experts just kind of digging into the data. But where we started also, and I think I corrected Claudio in the intro, saying, "Oh, everybody wants to be Netflix," and I'm like, "Well, that's so 5 years ago," because at least in our internal conversations, right, there's been a lot of change especially over the last couple of years. The pandemic also was just a huge catalyst for so much change. But the reality is our business moved from selling things to selling files now to gaining subscribers and shifting this entire business model to something that is not really what we've ever done in this business. And I'm curious, what you think about, things like FAST, free ad-supported television, which is a kind of a redo of AVOD, advertising video on demand, and how you look at this business, because ultimately it comes that we've also had the conversation around gut versus driving it with data, and it's got to be that magical combination of both, and it's very unique and peculiar. But if this industry is so like lightning in the bottle and kind of where we go, I'm curious about your thoughts. And Richard, happy to start with you. Like, is it madness? I mean, look, I come from the days of VHS, so I've seen a lot, just in my time. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
Well, so ever since the dawn of Hollywood, the terrible thing about getting into about getting into the entertainment business is that it's dependent on making hits. That if you want to succeed, you have to get hits. And no one knows what a hit will be. You can put together a great cast, a great idea, a great poster, great title, great everything, and for some reason people just don't want to see it. And it's a terrible business because you just have to put things out there and hope that people connect with it. So since the dawn of Hollywood, people have looked for ways to get around the fact that we're dependent on these silly audiences and their whims, and to make things to make series, or to turn into not just one film but a series. The Keystone Cops once upon a time, or make brands, and most recently make these universes that are bigger than an individual title and something bigger than that. So I see what's happening now as this attempt to make the brands and the services bigger than the titles. And the most telling thing, I write about this a lot, but the change that we stop referring to it as entertainment and we talk about it as content now, because entertainment is something that has to entertain, that has to fulfill a mission and do something specific. Content is stuff that you shove in a pipeline, and you hope to fill the pipeline with it. And you have these services now that are trying to churn out these bigger experiences, or that just keep people hooked in on the churn, and it's the latest way to try to avoid the hit and flop conundrum. What you're seeing lately with Netflix is the problem that you still have, even with this massive pipeline, the biggest pipeline that anyone has ever built in the history of Hollywood, you still have to get hits, and if you don't, you're in trouble.
So true. Sean, what do you think in terms of the evolution of the business? I mean, look, now we're chasing like a cable subscriber model, right, which is a much more difficult proposition, right, to maintain. And we're talking about things like customer acquisition costs and whatnot. And obviously data drives a lot of those decisions as well, spends and whatnot. What's your take on the new Hollywood, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, Matt Damon has spoken a bit about this, but even in the movie business per se, where, it's just the data is a little harder to come by, where, a lot of what fueled the movie business before was the DVD business, where if you sold a certain number of units, you got a check and you can make these movies that made financial sense. That's, as we all know, that's gone. One movie as a part of a streaming library sale to Netflix for 5 months is not, that doesn't show up the way you could point to, hey, or if you're Kevin Smith also spoke about this and how we got Clerks 3 made. His fans showed up to buy the DVD of his last film at Lionsgate, and they went back and said, this makes financial sense. Otherwise, it made no sense. So, but when this data is kind of housed under the owners of the content, back to Richard's thing, of Netflix and Amazon, they don't share this data. Back in the day, we all knew what the data was. The past 5 or 6 years, that's really changed. DVD data was widely available. Even, premium video on demand, or those businesses, were even out there. And when you have this primarily streaming model, whether it be a FAST model, which you've seen no data about what anybody's watching on FAST at all. You see user numbers, but you have no idea whether that's people watching Family Ties reruns or they're watching Spanish language programming. We have no idea what's driving the adoption of like a new business like that. That's a problem. And Richard, actually just wrote about this. I recommend reading this piece, but like when you're a creative, from the dawn of time, as Richard, wrote, like, you're based off the feedback you get from your audience and what streaming is, done. When there's no box office number, TV rating, whatever it is, you're just walking into Netflix and they're saying, yep, we're happy. That's your only metric of feedback, other than maybe a Twitter, trending on Twitter. But even that's relatively narrow of an audience. How do you gauge what the audience wants? And to Richard's point, how do you find those hits? It's a little bit harder to do than back in DVDs. You can just point to, yep, 10 million people bought that movie, or Liam Neeson movies sell really, really well, here. Now it's a little harder to tell as a creative and an executive as well.
And look, the dollars in home entertainment, right? Well, it's not the death of home entertainment, right? It's just the evolution of it, right? Hence the Entertainment Evolution Symposium, right? The idea also that the metric is harder to get, right? And look, this impacts everything downstream as well, right? This is residuals. There's an incredible part of this ecosystem that we're not turning our back on, but it's certainly not our priority anymore. And it's interesting because traditionally, the studios have gotten along, but they've never really gotten along. They've never been really great at sharing, right?
Yeah.
That's not been in their model, right? There was always, trying to think of their competitive advantage, whatnot. And we kind of got to the part in DVD at the end of it where it's like, oh, okay, how we supply, deal with our supply chain is not a competitive advantage. That was big. But now we're getting back into this. And like you said, data not being shared, it's like cloak and data, right? They want to share certain bits, and we don't have as many third-party mechanisms to get the data to say what it really is doing. So I'm curious. This is an open conversation, so please feel free to jump in. But when you think about that model, and all right, we killed the golden goose.
Well, it's remarkable because the tech world was supposed to be all about data and all about empirical evidence and not just making crazy gut calls and everything. And now we know less about the success of a show or a film than we ever did any time in history. Maybe the CEO of the companies know more about it, but no one else does. And you had two very basic metrics that you looked to before. You had box office and you had ratings, which were both very public, and you knew the next day how a movie did or how a show did, and everyone knew, and you knew during the course of a season of a show, was it going up, was it going down, and the creators could react to that. And now the creators, you talk to them, and all they're given by the streaming companies is that the executive will say, well, we're happy with it. So they used to get reams of data about, like, was the audience responding well to this new haircut, or did that joke go over and everything, and how were the ratings, how were the overnights, how was it in this demographic, how was it that, and now all they have is some mid-level executive says that he's happy, which, if you're a mid-level executive, that's a great place to be, having a whole show dancing on a pin waiting to find out if you're happy or not. But in terms of creating an actual feedback loop that anyone can work with in what was supposed to be a totally data-driven business, it's a very strange position.
And I don't know, Sean, if you have any insights on that side, because that's the other piece that's so interesting. Is all right, and what data is going to demonstrate that to you, and then who do you share it with, right? It's interesting. I've been watching The Offer. I mentioned it earlier. It's on Paramount Plus. It's funny. It's a lark, right? There's so much mythology around The Godfather, and it kind of serializes it, and it makes a good thing. But you also look at kind of how the old business ran, and it's in the lens of a entertainment piece, right? So you don't take it all as. But I know for a fact some of that stuff is very true. And I'm curious, what are your takes in terms of where data is taking those decision makers? Do you think it matters? Do you think there's even a blip, in terms of some of that data? Because we have more data now that's not as easily interpreted as ratings, right? Because I think it's just so much more complex. But I'm curious also your thoughts in terms of, like, do you think this is going to erode gut? And do you think it's something that's going to help or hinder in terms of short-term versus long-term? That's for you, Sean.
Yeah. It's also the global stage, and the business always had an international component, but it was so piecemeal and you really didn't hear much about it, where, it's something's big, like, well, it's big where? What is it serving? Netflix is in over 200 markets. If The Gray Man isn't the biggest hit in the US, but it added 10 million subscribers in India, maybe that justifies, so that we have such a US-centric focus, and understandably so, because The Godfather was the entertainment, the big hits, Marvel's made here, big movies in China don't, so we still drive the conversation, but when your business is now reliant upon these very large and burgeoning markets, and that's where the growth is, quite frankly, of their subscribers. It's not in the US anymore. How do you think about what's a hit for you is a different, even that you have to kind of caveat a bit. So, it's not fun as fun as it used to be or as simple as it used to be. But even, you look at something like, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, which I've written about this week, Game of Thrones is on HBO Max. HBO Max is in roughly 60 countries. Amazon Prime is in 240. These are two very, very different playing fields. So even the playing field, as we see it head to head here in the U.S., but they have to justify $500 million or whatever an episode, whatever the 500 billion, whatever the crazy number that Amazon's spending on it. And it's not just what did it do in the U.S. It's also what did it do for our global business and wares to justify what that success is. So that's also, evolved a bit. That's important to kind of keep in mind in all this stuff. But it's also, I know this isn't a marketing conference per se, but that's also changed in streaming, where your marketing costs and what that is. Richard and I have been talking a little bit about this series called Dahmer from Ryan Murphy, which is launching today. And this is a Ryan Murphy, got a $300 million deal, and I don't know, Guy, have you heard of it? I don't, it's like, where's the marketing is on the front page of the app. That goes into, 200 million households worldwide, or 220 million households. And, where before the HBO traditional campaign would be, doing TV spots, and, Game of Thrones had a much different approach to it. So even that sense of cost is also something to kind of, the marketing has changed along with that data, because you're relying upon the product to do a lot more of the lifting for you, where before you would be doing a spend and relying on those other things. But I will caveat one thing that I've also written recently about in the Wake Up is that, advertising is coming, which I think maybe we probably talked a bit about today, where Disney Plus is launching an ad version in December, Netflix is probably in November. And advertisers need reliable data. And this behind a veiled wall doesn't work for them. They're not going to trust you. You look at Amazon with Thursday Night Football that just launched. The Nielsen numbers still haven't come out 6 days later, for whatever reason that is. But they, literally signed up with Nielsen to rate Thursday Night Football because they need advertisers, to trust the numbers, and they're not going to trust what Amazon tells them.
Yep.
So advertising is a new era that's now, which we don't know how this is all going to shake out per se, but we are on the cusp of the next evolution of this conversation, where you can't just keep all the data to yourselves once you have advertising in the mix like that in a meaningful way as a part of your business. So that we'll see where it goes, but that's where my eyes at this point.
Richard, you mentioned tech companies earlier, right? So you think Apple, Amazon, Google, even Facebook, right? Even though they're not doing real premium content for us. But you think also this is like a paradigm shift for us. But I don't think we're seeing anything super inventive or super new, right? It tends to be herd mentality, right? One person says, hey, we're Pluto TV had some success with Paramount, obviously. They were a first mover. But now everybody's, piling on and packing on. What do you think these tech companies are thinking around some of this? And is it really inventive or new, or are they just hiring a bunch of Hollywood people and pretending that they're a studio?
They're finding their way back to recreating something that looks a whole lot like the cable bundle of 10 years ago. That it's going to have a lot of very traditional shows for a very broad audience. I just heard of a producer yesterday that had a police procedural, female-driven police procedural that would have been right at home on the CBS lineup in 2002. That had they had 7 streaming companies bidding for it, and they're a lot more very traditional programs. There's ads on it again. When you pay for Netflix or Hulu. The idea initially was it's going to be more a la carte, and you're going to be able to get more of what you want. But nobody wants more than a small sliver of what they're getting there. So you're paying for a bunch of stuff that you don't really want, just like with cable, and they're starting to they're moving away in pieces from the binge model to rolling things out in a more traditional schedule. So I'm not quite sure what the difference between this and cable is.
Well, you say a la carte to it, Sean. Please chime in on this as well, right? What world would it have been if 10 years ago the cable companies woke up and actually figured out the a la carte issue, right? Because that would have been very interesting. And this does tie into data and contracts and what they're contractually tied to in their existing agreements and whatnot. But Sean, what's your take on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, the legacy companies, you saw this just with Showtime and Paramount Plus. So the recent news this month is that, essentially Paramount is you can watch all your Showtime inside Paramount Plus now. You don't have to watch it in 2 different apps. And there's talk now they want to essentially fold Showtime into Paramount Plus, which I think, as we all kind of know, Showtime doesn't have the scale to exist, on the level of a Apple TV or Amazon, needs to that Paramount Plus heft. So, but you have all these legacy contracts with cable companies, and that's still a big part of their business. So the tech companies started fresh, and Hulu was fresh, and Netflix was fresh. They didn't have these things. They could do what they want and set their own deals and buy people out and not have to worry about syndication. And it existed where these companies have had to toe this line for the past 15 years. So with this rebundling, I mean, the biggest, like I say, it's a shame in a sense that the tech companies, I'm saying tech in the sense of Apple TV, Netflix, and even the streamers, Disney Plus to this extent, fooled the American public into thinking how much this costs. Disney Plus does not cost you $7 a month. It's a teaser rate to get built to scale. We're at the stage now where the American public is learning how much things cost. Netflix started at $8. It's now double the price. It was a great value, had this years-long perception of like, oh, I want to pay $60 for cable. I pay $8 on Netflix, and I get, and Netflix lost money for years, famously. They now make money. Why? Because they charge $16 a month for it. It's the proper price, so same thing with Disney. The price is going up $3 a month, in December. All the prices, Hulu's going up in October. HBO Max, when that combines with Discovery Plus next summer, who knows what that's going to be, It's back to Richard's point. It's this like same old song and dance. Not everything is new again in the tech world. I'm like, no, this is exactly the same thing we've all lived through. If you've been a media consumer for 25 years, it just had this period of about 5 or 6 or maybe 7 or 8 years where this was masked because all you had to do was increase your subscriber numbers, and Wall Street didn't care you were losing. Wall Street now cares how much money, or starting to care a lot more. And this is where the come home to whatever moment is, where it's like, okay, we have to start turning a profit in 2 years, and all these companies have pledged in earnings calls, we are going to be profitable by 2024, 2025, which is now, 2 years or less on the horizon, depending upon your math. So when you said that in 2019, it's like, yeah, we'll get there. And now, and now with interest rates, the cost of borrowing is a lot higher. All these realities are coming in, and then the consumer is looking around and saying, back to Richard's point, like, I'm paying for all the stuff I don't want again. It's that same sentiment, and I still don't know where to find it. And that's the bigger tech challenge of data, maybe a guy to talk about is, I mean, you knew the offer was on Paramount Plus, but a lot of times the frustration is just finding the thing you want. And yes, the aggregation hasn't quite happened yet, where the tool hasn't been, found or created in the tech world to show me just, they never named the show.
We're getting there though, by the way. We're working on that also from a universal search perspective. And that's also one of the groups that we do, IDER, Entertainment ID Registry. But it's fascinating also, we know a thing or two about loss leaders, right? People didn't realize how big loss leaders DVDs were for companies until we had the Shrek fiasco, right? And somebody had to report the amount that they had to destroy from a loss leader perspective because it didn't do it. Maybe it was Shrek 2. But that idea of, I think that's pretty revolutionary as well, is in terms of, all right, we're trying to get people into our world. We're trying to get them to be on our app so that we can know who they are, know what they're doing, so that we can serve them more stuff so that they'll stay in our world and not run away from our a la carte offering, because we know we only have this slice. I knew this was going to go quick, and we've just been chitter-chattering up here. I hope you've enjoyed being the fly on the wall with our bar conversation. I would love to talk, just to end with maybe a little bit of M&A. We talked about mergers and acquisitions in our space from a data perspective in the panel just previous that I was just moderating. Where do you see that going, right? The whole idea, are we turning into the music business where there's only going to be 3 labels left out of the hundreds, or what are your thoughts?
I've thought that I've been waiting for people to get in on the other side of. Sean mocks me when I've raised this a few times that I think there's huge. Everyone's going so broad in streaming that for someone to start a streaming service targeted for 15-year-old girls and make the best the shows that every 15-year-old girl.
Super targeted.
Yeah, and it's just I think if you have a product that has the loyalty of every 15-year-old girl on the planet, you have something valuable. But I think a lot of these big companies are so leveraged and have so much debt to deal with that it's going to be very hard for them to keep going on their own like this. I think they're not in a position where they can scale back and become a service targeted for 15-year-old girls anymore. So
no, agreed. Agreed. I think that's the niche part also that's so critical. Sean, your take on that and also for the last word from the video screen in New York. And I'm looking at your clock and going like, oh, we need to go. We're due for drinks. Any last words also
here.
on that M&A piece and how data may be driving some of those decisions?
Sure. I mean, aggregation is key, but debt's the big word right now, and it's the thing why AT&T unloaded Warner Brothers a lot was because they had under $15 billion in debt. They unloaded it onto this new company, which they still have. And the big word, with Comcast and Warner Brothers, Comcast has a lot of debt from buying Sky. There's not these, as much as they want to think everybody has endless pockets of money. Where is it going to go? I'm like, with interest rates the way they're going, and getting more money is harder. It was cheap money for a long time, so this was a lot more feasible. That's why you saw a lot more M&A. I think this year you've demonstrably seen far fewer deals across not just entertainment, but Wall Street in general. A lot of this stuff kind of hit the skids. So I think you're right. I think ultimately there will be some. It'll be 3 or 4 probably large. I'm a little more cynical that way. But I think it's going that way. I don't know how fast that's going to go. It's probably not as fast as people think that this will happen. I think that's probably the only thing at this point with the economy going, a lot of unpredictability there.
Well, and certainly the pandemic, put a wrinkle in everybody's plans as well. So, well, look, I wanted to introduce you, the Ankler, also to our MESA crowd. And ultimately, I thought this was such a great thing. Thanks to Klarmi Zlotnick, who from Legendary, who actually made this happen previously at Apple. But ultimately, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your opinions, sharing your views. We're all gonna head out here and have a drink after our closing remarks. Sean, we wish you were here. Good night from New York, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.